And I think that the iPhone story is a great example of how we were sold a narrative by Steve Jobs himself, I think, which it turns out not to be true. Apple is usually a very secretive company, but they allowed the true story of the iPhone to emerge. And what happened, the short version, it's a very long history, is that the iPod was a huge success for Apple. It accounted for about half of the revenue, but then smartphones emerged and became a threat. So Apple had to do something about phones, and there was immense pressure on Steve Jobs himself to develop a phone, and he didn't want to, for a very clear reason. He saw that all the mobile phones being developed are being kind of influenced by the service providers, the telcos, and they are influencing the design, and he didn't want to do anything with that. He wanted complete control. But because of the pressure, a bunch of projects started roughly in parallel. One of those was actually a cooperation with Motorola, where they launched this Motorola phone that could play MP3s or have some of the iPod functionality. This project actually launched, and through it, Apple created a partnership with AT&T that later on led to the fact that AT&T allowed Apple to launch the iPhone without intervening. So this was a really good strategic track, but the product itself sucked and Apple didn't like it and they stopped the partnership. But that alone convinced Steve Jobs to give it a go. And then from this other team that did a clandestine project, they came up with MultiTouch, which existed in a more primitive format, but they refined it a lot. He didn't like it initially, but then he saw that it actually is an amazing thing. They wanted to build a tablet around it first. That turned out to be too costly. He killed that project. But as this phone or the pressure to create a phone emerged, Steve Jobs tasked this team to try to create a multi-touch phone. In parallel, another team was trying to create an iPod phone with the interface of the iPod. And he ran these two projects in competition, very Apple like internally. And they competed until it was clear that the multi touch phone is better. So one team developed the hardware without seeing the secretive interface that the other team developed. And that's how it continued. And then another development was that they needed an operating system. So the team doing the software said, let's take OS 10, or as we most of us call it OS X, and let's miniaturize it and put it inside the phone. That will give us require more memory and more battery, but will give us a lot more capabilities. And then I think that that's maybe the first time that the post PC vision came, because this became a very powerful device. And Steve Jobs realized that actually people could do a lot more on it than just play music and make phone calls. So that's kind of, and that's a subset of the story, how from different directions this perfect device emerged. And Steve Jobs was initially against it, then he kind of navigated different directions. No one really knew what's the solution. It kind of emerged through trial and error, and it took them 5 years to get to that point. And when it came out, the story was, it was Steve Jobs brainstorming in his kitchen, and he just told the team to build it.
Wow. Okay. I did not know that story.